Don't touch that pen. The woman grabbed my wrist before my hand reached the clipboard, her voice barely above a whisper, urgent, almost frightened. Walk away from this desk, right now. I'll explain everything. I froze. The fluorescent lights of Northwestern Memorial's admissions lobby hummed above us. My nephew was somewhere in this building, supposedly fighting for his life, and a stranger I'd never seen before was telling me not to sign the paperwork that would let the doctors treat him. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything. The call had come at 7:14 inches the morning. A Tuesday in March, sky still dark outside my kitchen window, coffee just starting to brew. I saw the number and didn't recognize it, which was unusual for a man who'd spent 31 years as a Chicago homicide detective. I answered before the second ring. Is this Frank Callahan? A male voice, professional, clipped, speaking. Mr. Callahan, this is Dr. Soren at Northwestern Memorial. Your nephew, Kyle Reeves, was brought in approximately 40 minutes ago. He's been in a serious accident, multiple injuries. We need a family member present immediately to authorize treatment decisions. The coffee maker finished its cycle behind me. The sound was absurd, mundane, completely at odds with the words echoing in my ears. What kind of accident? A fall. He came in through emergency. I can't give you full details on the phone, but I need you here, Mr. Callahan. Time matters with these injuries. I set the mug down without pouring, grabbed my jacket off the chair by the door. My nephew's face was already in my mind. 29 years old. The son of my younger brother Danny, who died of a heart attack 6 years ago at 51. Kyle had nobody else after Danny passed. I'd taken him in when he was 18 and still am, technically, his closest living relative. The drive to the hospital took 22 minutes. I ran one red light on North Michigan Avenue and didn't feel a moment of guilt about it. Northwestern Memorial's main entrance glowed white and cold in the early morning. The automatic doors opened before I reached them, and the blast of recycled hospital air hit me. Antiseptic and recycled warmth. I'd been in hospitals more times than I could count over a career spent documenting violent ends, but this was different. This was family. The admissions desk was staffed by a young man who took my name and asked me to wait. I didn't sit. I stood near the desk, watching the doors at the back of the lobby, the ones that led somewhere important, trying to read the faces of everyone who came through them. The young man returned with a clipboard. Mr. Callahan, we need you to complete some paperwork before the treating physician can speak with you. He set it on the counter and handed me a pen. That was the moment the woman appeared. She came from a doorway to my left, moving fast, and her hand closed around my wrist before I'd even registered she was there. Carol Hennessy. That's the name I'd later learned from her badge, which had turned backward during whatever urgency had propelled her across the lobby. Don't touch that pen. She whispered it so close to my ear I could hear the controlled panic underneath her professionalism. Walk away from this desk right now. I'll explain everything. The young man at the admissions desk looked up, confused. I held up one finger at him. 31 years of reading human beings under pressure told me in 3 seconds that this woman was not a threat. She was terrified and telling the truth. I followed her. She led me through a door marked staff only, down a corridor lined with supply carts, and into a small room that appeared to be used for billing reviews. Stacks of folders on a metal table, 2 chairs. She closed the door behind us and pressed her back against it. I'm Carol Hennessy. I work in the Billing and Admissions Compliance Department. Her voice steadied as she spoke, as if the act of identifying herself helped her organize everything else. I've been here 16 years. I need you to understand, I'm not supposed to be telling you any of this, but I watched them set it up this morning, and I couldn't just stand there. Set what up? Your nephew isn't injured. The room was very quiet. He walked into this hospital at 6:15 this morning with his girlfriend. They spoke to someone at admissions, not through our normal intake process, through a side entrance we use for staff. I know the person they spoke to. I'm not ready to say her name yet, but I saw them. Carol exhaled. They arranged the paperwork on that clipboard. It's not standard consent to treat forms. There's a financial power of attorney buried in the middle. Page 3. It transfers control of your banking accounts to your nephew immediately, framed as medical necessity authorization. I looked at the wall behind her. Somewhere down the hall, a cart wheeled past, wheels squeaking against linoleum. He called you from a number you don't recognize, she continued. That's because he used a prepaid phone. I heard him on the call. He was outside the staff entrance when I came in this morning. I was early. He didn't see me. 31 years of interviews. 31 years of sitting across from people who were lying and people who weren't, and learning to feel the difference the way a pilot feels turbulence. Carol Hennessy was not lying. She was shaking slightly, and her eyes hadn't moved from mine, and she had nothing to gain from this, and everything to lose. Would you be willing to tell me exactly what you heard? Yes. No hesitation, and I'll put it in writing if you need me to. I asked her to wait. I took out my phone and opened the voice memo application. Set it on the table between us. Tell me everything from the beginning. She did. 12 minutes of careful, specific detail. Time, location, exact words she'd overheard, the name of the admissions staff member who'd been approached. When she finished, I saved the recording and looked at this woman who'd risked her job to stop a stranger from being robbed. Thank you, I said. I mean that. She nodded. What are you going to do? Walk back out to that lobby, I said, and sign those papers. Her eyes went wide. I held up a hand. Not the real ones. 20 minutes later, I left that hospital through the front entrance with the clipboard tucked under my arm. I hadn't signed anything. I'd stood at the admissions desk, asked to take the forms with me to read carefully, and the young man had been too uncertain to refuse. In my car, I photographed every page of the paperwork. Carol had been exactly right. Page 1 and 2 were standard medical authorization language, boilerplate. Page 3 was a durable power of attorney for financial decisions. My name on the authorization line. Kyle's name in the beneficiary field. Notarized already, which meant someone with a notary seal had been involved before I'd even walked through the door. I sat in the parking garage and let myself be angry for exactly 4 minutes. I timed it. An old habit from the job. Anger is useful in small doses. In large doses, it makes you stupid, and I could not afford to be stupid. Kyle had lived in my spare bedroom for 11 years. He'd come to me at 18 after his father died, lost and directionless, and I'd spent 3 years helping him find his footing. I'd paid for his community college classes. I'd pulled strings at the city to get him an interview for a maintenance supervisor position. I'd attended his birthday dinners and sat in the front row at his brother's memorial and driven him to the hospital when he broke his wrist in 2019. And somewhere in the middle of all that, he'd started looking at my house differently, started asking questions about my pension, started bringing home a girlfriend named Amber who asked too many things, with a smile that stopped exactly at her eyes. I thought back over the last 8 months, the conversation where Kyle had mentioned, casually, that my neighborhood was changing, property values were up, had I thought about downsizing. The afternoon Amber had asked what I paid in property taxes and nodded knowingly when I told her, the way they'd started treating the refrigerator as theirs. The way Kyle had once, only once, and I'd marked it, asked if I had a will and who my estate attorney was. I'd given him the benefit of the doubt each time. Told myself he was young and thoughtless, not predatory. I'd been wrong. I started the car and pulled out onto Fairbanks Court, heading north. 3 calls to make, and the order mattered. The first was to Tom Brannigan, the best real estate and estate attorney I knew, a man I'd consulted with on a handful of cases over the years where fraud and inheritance intersected. His receptionist put me through inside of 90 seconds when I said my name. Frank. What do you need? I need an emergency appointment. Today, Tom. This afternoon, if you can. He could. The second call was to a private investigation firm I'd used during my last 3 years on the force when I needed background work done quietly. Diane Marsh ran it now. She was thorough and discreet, and answered on the second ring. Frank Callahan, she said. It's been a while. I need a comprehensive background on 2 people. Everything public record and anything that touches it. How fast can you move? Depends on the subjects. A 29-year-old male and a 27-year-old female. Both living in Chicago. Week, maybe 10 days for a full report. I'll take whatever you can give me in 5. She named her retainer. I agreed without negotiating. The third call I made was back to Northwestern Memorial. I asked for billing compliance and asked for Carol Hennessy. She picked up immediately. "I'm going to need that written statement you mentioned," I said. "Whenever you're ready, on your own timeline, no pressure. But I want you to know I'm moving on this." "I'll have something written by the end of the week," she said. "I already pulled the internal access logs from this morning. There's a record of who processed those forms before you arrived. I'm going to make a copy of it tonight, before anything gets deleted." 16 years of watching a billing compliance desk will teach a person how institutions erase their own mistakes. "Carol," I said, "be careful." I drove home through morning traffic and walked through the front door of my house. My house, where I'd lived for 19 years, where Danny's photograph was framed on the wall above the mantel, where Kyle had spent his first 3 nights in Chicago, sleeping on my couch, under a blanket from my hall closet. His running shoes were by the door. Amber's jacket was on the hook above them. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table and thought. Tom Brannigan's office was in the Loop, 7th floor, a view of Lake Michigan on a clear day. That afternoon wasn't clear, clouds pressing low over the city, but I wasn't there for the view. I laid everything out on his conference table. The photograph paperwork, my phone with Carol's recorded statement, 3 years of financial transactions I'd flagged, just for this meeting, withdrawals Kyle had asked me to make for various reasons. Loan for Amber's car repair, $8,000, 18 months ago. Help covering a security deposit on a storage unit for some side business, $4,200, 8 months ago. Emergency cash for a medical bill that had somehow not involved any follow-up paperwork, $6,100, 6 months back. Tom read through everything twice without speaking. "The power of attorney document," he said finally, "is legally invalid on its face because you didn't sign it, and it was pre-notarized, which requires a present signatory. Whoever notarized this committed fraud. That's a criminal matter in addition to the civil exposure." I know. The scheme itself, fabricating a medical emergency to obtain a signature on financial documents, that's wire fraud given the phone call. Elder financial exploitation. Under Illinois Statute 720 ILCS 517-56. And conspiracy, if you can show the girlfriend's involvement. He tapped the edge of the table. "Frank, if even half of what you've described is accurate, these two are looking at felony charges." "It's accurate. Then we need to do 2 things immediately. Revise your will and restructure your accounts before they try another approach." I'd expected this. "What do you recommend?" He walked me through it over the next 2 hours. The house, currently in my name with no secondary designee, would be placed in a revocable living trust with the Chicago Police Foundation as the charitable beneficiary, an organization I'd supported for years. Kyle would receive a specific bequest of $25,000, which Tom recommended leaving intact rather than removing entirely. Removing him completely before the legal case concludes gives him grounds to contest the will based on undue influence. Leave something. Make it clear it's deliberate. I agreed. From Tom's office, I went directly to my bank. Not the branch where I'd banked for 12 years on Clark Street, where the manager knew my name. A different branch on Wacker Drive where nobody knew my face. I transferred $220,000 into a new account. Left $68,000 in the original account, enough to appear accessible if Kyle decided to check, which I was increasingly certain he had the login information to do. I'd noticed once, 8 months ago, that my laptop had been moved slightly when I came home. The angle wrong. The way my late wife had once pointed out to me that evidence always has a position and a context. I hadn't confronted him. I'd changed my banking password the next morning and started watching. The new account number went into my wallet and nowhere else. Driving home that evening, I felt something settle in my chest. Not relief, not yet. A familiar sensation from 31 years of building cases. The particular quality of momentum when pieces start moving in the right direction. They thought they were playing a retired man who'd spent his best years catching other people's killers and wouldn't see it coming from inside his own house. They had miscalculated. Kyle was home when I arrived. Amber was in the kitchen cooking something that smelled like garlic and olive oil. She smiled at me over her shoulder when I walked in, that practiced, warm smile. Kyle was on the couch with his feet on my coffee table, which he knew I disliked and had started doing only in the past 6 months. "How was your morning?" he asked. "Quiet," I said. "Went for a drive?" Something moved in his eyes. Just a flicker. He nodded and looked back at his phone. I went to my study, closed the door, and began building my evidence file. The next 4 days were performance. I moved through my own house like a man who suspected nothing, because 31 years of undercover coordination had taught me that the worst thing a target can do is tip off the subject before the evidence is airtight. I ate dinner at the same table as Kyle and Amber. I listened to them talk about money with the low, careful urgency of people who are behind on something. I watched Kyle's eyes track my movements when I opened my desk drawer, when I mentioned calling my accountant, when I took an envelope from the mail that might contain financial statements. Amber asked me once, on the third evening, if I'd been thinking more about retirement housing, communities for active seniors. She'd found some brochures, she said. Wonderful amenities, lake views. I looked at her steadily. "I like my house," I said. She smiled again. "Of course, just something to think about." On the 5th day, Diane Marsh called. "I have your preliminary report ready. You're going to want to sit down." I was already sitting. I told her to go ahead. Kyle had no income from any legitimate employer for the past 22 months. He'd quit the maintenance supervisor position I'd helped him get without telling me, which explained why he was home during hours when he'd claimed to be at work. His income was coming from online sports betting platforms. Total documented losses in the past 18 months, $53,000. Diane had accessed the public records from 3 debt collection actions filed in Cook County. Amber had a prior arrest in Indiana from 4 years ago. Fraud charges dismissed when her co-defendant took a plea. The co-defendant was her previous boyfriend, a man 15 years her senior, who had subsequently filed a civil suit against her, which had been settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. The pattern was recognizable to anyone who'd spent decades studying criminal methodology. There was more. Kyle had applied for a loan against the equity in my house 3 weeks ago, using a document that appeared to have my signature on the cosigner line. The lender had flagged the application because the signature didn't match the bank's records. They'd frozen the application pending verification and sent a letter to my address that Kyle, who checked the mail before I did, had likely intercepted. I asked Diane to document everything and deliver the full report to Tom Brannigan's office. Then I went to find the mail. I kept the last 3 months of unopened mail in a drawer in my study, a habit from my detective days of never throwing anything away before you know what it is. I found the letter from the mortgage company inside of 8 minutes. Flagged loan application. Suspected signature irregularity. Please call to confirm. The date on the letter was 12 days ago. I called the mortgage company from my study, with the door locked. A fraud specialist named Raymond confirmed the application, pulled up the scanned documents while I was on the phone, and read me the signature name, Frank J. Callahan, my middle initial, which Kyle would have known. "Do you want us to file a formal fraud report?" Raymond asked. "Not yet," I said. "Give me 2 weeks. Then yes." I set down the phone and opened the evidence folder I'd labeled with the date I'd walked into Carol Hennessy's billing compliance room. The folder was getting heavy. That night I lay in bed listening to them through the wall. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. Amber's voice first. "He hasn't said anything about the hospital. Maybe he didn't notice the POA." Kyle. "He noticed. He had to have noticed. He's not stupid." Amber. "Then why isn't he doing anything?" "Because he doesn't know what to do." A pause. "Or he thinks he can handle it himself. He's the kind of guy who thinks he can handle everything himself." Amber again, quieter. "We need to move faster. The debt payment is in 3 weeks, and my contact at the lender isn't going to hold it any longer." "I know, Kyle. If the house application gets rejected or investigated, we lose the whole thing. We need a different way in." A long silence. Then Kyle's voice, low in a way that was worse than if he'd been loud. "There are other ways to transfer an estate." "What does that mean?" "He's 63. He's alone. Nobody checks on him. If something happened, something that looked like an accident, Don't. I'm just saying, people fall. Old people especially. Stairs, bathtubs. It happens. Amber was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. We'd need to be somewhere else when it happened. I lay motionless in the dark and let that conversation settle into every corner of what I knew about them. My nephew, the boy I'd taken in when he had nowhere else to go, had just discussed my death as a financial planning option. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The voice memo was already running. I'd started it before I got into bed. I saved the recording, encrypted it, sent copies to 3 locations. Then I lay in the dark for another hour, not sleeping, thinking with the cold mechanical clarity that had made me good at my job for 3 decades. They had just made their final mistake. I let 1 more week pass. Let them continue to perform normalcy over dinner. Let Amber bring home another stack of senior living brochures that appeared on the coffee table one morning while I pretended not to see them. Let Kyle make 2 more attempts to check my laptop while I was out. Attempts I documented through a camera application I'd installed on the device. Then I drove to Tom Brannigan's office and laid everything on his table. Carol Hennessy's written statement, the recorded conversation from Northwestern Memorial, the forged mortgage application documents, the photographed POA paperwork, Diane Marsh's full investigation report, the recording from the night Kyle and Amber discussed staging an accident. Tom read through it all without speaking. When he finished, he removed his reading glasses and set them on the table. "Frank," he said, "this is a complete criminal case. You don't need to build it any further." I know. The recording of them discussing potential physical harm changes the nature of this. That's not just fraud anymore. That's conspiracy to commit murder. Depending on how the DA chooses to charge it, I want it all on the table when they're arrested, I said. Not just the fraud. He nodded slowly. Then I'm calling the state's attorney's office this afternoon, and I want you to go directly from this office to file a police report on the forged mortgage application. That creates an active criminal investigation that justifies what comes next. I filed the police report at 2 in the afternoon. A detective I'd known 20 years ago, Mike Pierce, now working financial crimes, took my statement personally and spent 40 minutes reviewing the documents. "Frank," he said when he'd finished, "this is as clean as it gets. We'll have enough for a warrant within 48 hours. There's something else you need to hear." I played him the recording. He listened to the whole thing without expression. When it ended, he sat quietly for a moment. "I'm classifying this as a threat assessment matter," he said. "As of today, you have police documentation that your life has been explicitly threatened by people currently living in your home." He looked at me. "Do you want us to move on the arrest today?" "Tomorrow morning," I said. "Early." That evening, I sat in my kitchen and cooked dinner for 3 people for the last time. Pasta, which Kyle had always liked. He ate 2 portions and told me it was good, and asked if I'd thought any more about Amber's suggestion about the senior community over by Lincoln Park. "I've been thinking about it," I said. He looked up. Something shifted behind his eyes, a small brightening. "Really?" "I've been thinking about a lot of things lately," I said. "Got some estate planning done, actually. Wanted to make sure everything was in order." Amber set down her fork. "That's so smart, Frank. Really responsible." I thought so. I looked at her. "I revised my will last week. Everything's been filed with the county. I put the house into a trust." I paused, made sure it's all properly documented and protected. Just peace of mind. A silence opened at that table. Kyle's jaw worked slightly. Amber's smile had gone very still. Kyle started. "That's great. Good to have things in order." "It really is," I said. "Sleep better knowing it's handled." I cleared the dishes and went to my study and locked the door and didn't come out again that evening. At 6:45 the following morning, 2 patrol cars and an unmarked vehicle pulled up in front of my house. Mike Pierce was in the unmarked car. I'd unlocked the front door before they arrived. I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee when Kyle came downstairs, still half asleep, and opened the front door to find 2 officers on the porch. I didn't go into the hallway. I heard it from where I was sitting, the confusion in his voice. The moment that confusion shifted into something else, the sound of handcuffs, Amber's voice coming from the top of the stairs, then changing when she understood what was happening. They were both in custody within 10 minutes. Kyle saw me as they walked him through the kitchen toward the side door. He stopped for one moment, the officer's hand on his arm. "You knew," he said. "This whole time you knew." I looked at my nephew across the kitchen table, across everything that had passed between us since he was 18 years old. "I gave you everything I had to give," I said. "You made your choices." He didn't say anything else. The door closed behind him. I sat in the kitchen for a while after the cars left. The coffee had gone cold. Outside the window, Chicago was waking up, traffic beginning to build on the street, somebody's dog barking 2 houses down, the city proceeding with complete indifference to what had just occurred in this house. I refilled my mug and went to my study. The trial, when it came 7 months later, lasted 4 days. The evidence was, as Mike Pierce had said, as clean as it gets. Carol Hennessy testified on the first day, her voice steady, her recollection precise. She described exactly what she'd seen at 6:15 in the morning, exactly what she'd overheard Kyle saying into the prepaid phone, exactly why she'd crossed that lobby and grabbed a stranger's wrist. The defense attempted to suggest she was mistaken about what she'd heard. She corrected them with the specificity of a woman who had spent 16 years in billing compliance and understood the difference between what she'd witnessed and what she hadn't. Diane Marsh's investigative report was entered into evidence. The forged mortgage documents were entered. The recording from Northwestern Memorial Lobby was played. The recording from Through My Bedroom Wall was played last, and I watched the jury listen to Kyle's voice discussing how old people fall sometimes, and I watched their faces, and that was enough. Kyle received 18 months in state prison for forgery, elder financial exploitation, and conspiracy charges. The conspiracy to commit charge related to the planning conversation added 14 months to what would have been a lighter sentence. The judge, a 68-year-old man who had presumably spent some portion of his life wondering about the people he trusted, was not lenient. Amber received 12 months for her role in the POA scheme and the forged mortgage application. Her prior Indiana arrest, which had been dismissed, was referenced in the sentencing argument as evidence of a pattern. The notary who had pre-stamped the power of attorney document lost her commission and faced a separate fraud charge. I was in the courtroom for the sentencing. I sat in the gallery, and I didn't feel triumph. I felt the same thing I'd felt at the end of the cases that had mattered most over a long career, the specific weight of something concluded correctly. The estate documents were finalized and recorded with the county before Kyle was transferred to the correctional facility. The house went into the trust. The charitable designation stood. $25,000 remained in Kyle's bequest, exactly as Tom had recommended, a sum that would be waiting for him in a decade when he needed it and had perhaps become someone capable of using it differently. I sold Amber's jacket to a second-hand store on Belmont Avenue and used the money to buy myself a very good bottle of bourbon. On a Wednesday afternoon in November, 4 months after the sentencing, Carol Hennessy called my cell phone. I answered on the first ring because I'd saved her number the day we met in that billing compliance room. "I wanted to let you know," she said, "that the hospital implemented new intake verification protocols. Any document requiring a signature from someone other than the patient has to be reviewed by a compliance officer before it's presented. What happened with those forms? It won't happen to anyone else coming through our doors." I stood at my back window, looking at the yard, the last of the leaves off the trees, the sky, the particular gray of Chicago in November, that people from other cities find oppressive, and that I have always found honest. "That matters, Carol," I said. "That matters a great deal. I also wanted to thank you for acting on what I told you. I've worked in hospitals a long time, and I've seen people dismiss things they don't want to be true. You didn't do that. You're the one who walked across that lobby." A small silence. Then she said, "The admissions staff member who processed those forms was terminated and is facing her own review. I thought you'd want to know." We spoke for another few minutes. When the call ended, I remained at the window. My brother Danny had loved this house. He'd helped me hang the gutters the summer after I bought it, stood on the ladder for 4 hours on a July afternoon, and argued with me about the proper way to angle them, and been right about it, and told me so. His photograph was still on the mantel. That wouldn't change. What had changed was everything surrounding it. The weight that had settled over this house in the 2 years Kyle and Amber had been here, The low, constant pressure of being watched by people who were calculating rather than caring. That weight was gone. The rooms were mine again in a way that I hadn't noticed I'd lost. Financially, everything was recovered. The $68,000 I'd left visible in my original account had never been accessed. The $220,000 in the secondary account was intact. Tom Brannigan had filed a civil claim on my behalf related to the mortgage fraud and recovered court costs and damages. Total losses to me through the entire scheme were less than the cost of the dinners I'd cooked them. They had wanted to take everything. They had taken nothing. I thought about what Kyle had said in that courtroom doorway. You knew. This whole time, you knew. He'd meant it as an accusation, the way people who've been caught always want to locate betrayal on the other side of the room, as if my knowing somehow equaled my having done something wrong. But knowing isn't the same as doing. I had known my nephew was struggling financially long before any of this began. I had known Amber was watching me with a particular kind of attention that wasn't warmth. I had known, at some level I'd chosen not to examine, that the questions they asked about my estate weren't casual. I had offered him a different path every single time the opportunity arose. Dinner conversations about getting back to work, mentioning contacts who could help him find legitimate employment, asking gently about the side business that had apparently consumed $4,200 without producing visible results. He had chosen his path himself, every step of it. That was the truth I had to sit with, and it wasn't a comfortable one. My nephew, the son of my brother, had looked at the man who'd taken him in and calculated what he was worth and decided fraud and theft. And eventually the contemplation of something worse was a reasonable way to collect. And the only thing standing between him and success had been 31 years of knowing how evidence works, and a woman in a billing compliance department who could not walk past a wrong thing without doing something about it. The bourbon I'd bought with Amber's jacket money was on my desk. I poured 2 fingers and carried it back to the window. Danny would have been devastated. I knew that with certainty. He had loved his son the way fathers do, with the particular blindness of it, the inability to see the shape a person is becoming until they've already become it. And maybe that's where I had failed Kyle too, in the years before the fall, by being the person who provided without being the person who confronted, by letting things slide because I didn't want to be wrong about who he was. But there was nothing productive in that line of thinking, and I had learned long ago to leave that corridor closed. The Chicago winter was settling in properly now, the way it does, like a serious commitment. I had a book I'd been meaning to read for 6 months. A clean house with new locks that only I had keys to, and for the first time in longer than I cared to calculate, an evening with nothing in it that required me to perform peace I didn't feel. I was 63 years old. I had spent more than half my life watching what people do to each other and working to make sure those actions had consequences. I had not anticipated needing to apply that work inside my own walls. But I had. They had thought I was slowing down. They had thought the years had made me soft, made me easy, turned the man who'd spent 3 decades in the business of consequences into someone who could be outmaneuvered by a 29-year-old with debt problems and a girlfriend with a history. They had thought wrong about all of it. My house was quiet. My records were in order. My conscience was clear. I went to my chair by the window, opened the book, and let Chicago do what it does in November, which is nothing at all, beautifully. If this story meant something to you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. It means more than you know. Click the box on the right to hear the next story, and thank you for being here.